Little Rock was still very much segregated. Separate bathrooms, lunch counters, public facilities, even after the Little Rock 9. There were 5 people who came to Arkansas to change that. Our Alexis Rogers joins us now with how Freedom Riders forever changed Arkansas.
Scott, these Freedom Riders and their sense of fearlessness mark an important event in Arkansas history that many times gets overlooked.
I was about to get a second education I wasn't supposed to get.
In July of 1961, the way of life in Little Rock was about to change.
I sent in that anonymous letter and expecting nothing. And suddenly I got a call from Jim Farmer, the head of Corps, and he wanted me.
After the very widely publicized desegregation of schools in 1957 with the Little Rock 9, folks in Little Rock knew what it was like to be in the national spotlight.
People in Little Rock were very much on a back foot. They didn't want to be in the headlines again. They'd just gotten out of the headlines for negative publicity. The economy had been really badly hit because of that negative publicity.
The city was still very separated.
Still segregated drinking fountains, segregated restrooms, segregation at lunch counters. Pretty much every part of downtown was still thoroughly segregated.
The St. Louis branch of the Congress of Racial Equality formed a team of 5 young people from across the country to go on the ride of a lifetime through the South.
I was naive. I didn't know what the heck I was getting into, to be honest. And I said, sure, I'll go. And we went out to, I went out to St. Louis and was joined there by 2 blacks and another white woman from New York City, an artist.
30-year-old Benjamin Elton Cox, a reverend from North Carolina, was the veteran Freedom Rider. 18-year-old Annie Lumpkin was a student from St. Louis. 23-year-old Janet Renitz was an artist and homemaker. 23-year-old Bliss Ann Malone was a teacher from St. Louis. And 27-year-old John Curtis Raines was a pastor and Fulbright scholar from New York. They all boarded a Freedom bus in St. Louis with the goal of desegregating public transportation facilities throughout the South from St. Louis to New Orleans. After all, the 1960 U.S. Supreme Court's Boynton versus Virginia decision ordered integration of all bus terminals. They were about to receive a lesson up close and personal.
I'm obviously a white guy. Perhaps not so obviously. I was born into a class privilege. I went to private schools, I went to elite universities, I went to elite graduate schools, and all the way through that, no teacher ever told us, privileged white males, that we lived life and understood life from a tiny bubble.
They were on the way to New Orleans, which is more in the deep South, and they expected more trouble there. So they expected to pass through Little Rock with ease.
They arrived at the Trailways bus station, which is now where the Stevens parking lot is.
We got there early in the evening. There was a mob. We went, the 4 of us together, black and white together, into the white waiting room together, and we sat down. And we were promptly arrested. The charge was a threatened breach of the peace. Now, I had never been arrested before, and I was entering very interesting territory.
A 6-month prison sentence and a $500 fine. That's what their so-called crime equated to in Arkansas.
The Arkansas General Assembly passed a whole range of laws that were directed to doing a variety of things, but one of them was to forestall nonviolent direct action protests. And that law was passed as part of a raft of laws to try and stop civil rights demonstrations.
Their fight for freedom was just beginning.
The next day, we were brought before Judge Quinn Glover, a man like me, a white male of class privilege. And he said, I've got to take you into chambers. I want to talk with you before I find you guilty. And he took us into chambers. He said, this is what he said. This is a direct quote. I'm going to find you guilty because if I don't, I won't get reelected. And the guy I'm running against is worse on niggers than I am.
The Freedom Riders weren't just arrested once, but twice, because they didn't believe the judge. They said this was about getting Arkansans the rights the law said that they had.
And eventually, the judge relented and admitted that he didn't actually have the legal authority to stop them from continuing on the freedom ride. And he relented and he gave them another good talking to, but he had to let them go.
Little Rock became the lesson to prepare them for the tough trials ahead.
I was entering into the deeper and deeper South as we went south from Little Rock, and therefore entering deeper and deeper into the territory of Ku Klux Klan, who wanted to kill me. Thank God they didn't.
More than 50 years later, John Raines is now Dr. Raines. He's a professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. After battling for civil rights firsthand, Raines says communities are still pleading for justice.
Americans are mad today. They have every right to be mad today. If you're a patriot, you're a mad American today. But the answer is not less government. The answer is better government.
Keeping the fight and the ride to freedom going.
Should struggle to be a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people, not just the special people at the top.
The Freedom Riders did successfully get to New Orleans after all of that traveling.
Yeah, very interesting. You hear so much about Little Rock Central. We don't hear so much about the Freedom Riders. Alexis, thanks for that report.